Boker Tov Talmudim, and welcome once again to another Soulful Psalms. It's always delightful to talk with you, and we have now moved into the final third of the Psalm collection. And today we're going to be talking about Psalm 103. Now, this is a long psalm, and there's a number of different things going on in it, but I really want to call your attention to two things. The first is uh, let's start all the way down in verse 14, which has rhetoric that we use quite a bit at funerals. And this is part of a much larger trajectory, talking about God's righteousness and talking about God's authority over the hosts and also God's love for us. And this is where this picks up. So if we go to 14, for he knows how we are formed. This is actually a very important idea in Judaism. I usually use a midrash to illustrate this, and that is the idea that if anybody understands how flawed we are as human beings and has compassion on us, it's God. Because, as the midrash goes, a potter decides to form a pot, and in the process of it, he accidentally, unintentionally lodges a pebble in the pot. So he fires the pot, and when the pot is done, he discovers, lo and behold, the pot leaks. Whose fault is that? Is that the fault of the pot, or is that the fault of the potter? Uh, the point being that God knows that he made us imperfect, and therefore the idea that God a priori might punish us for the flaw that he himself uh, brought into our being is makes no sense. And therefore we should have confidence that God understands and forgives our flaws in advance, and we don't have to have any special intervention in order to overcome our flaws. It's a God designed system, as it were. For he knows how we are formed. He is mindful that we are dust. On it goes. Man, his days are like those of grass. This is really what we use a lot in funerals. He blooms like a flower in the field. The wind passes by and it is no more. In its place, no longer, its own place, forgive me, its own place no longer knows it. In other words, we are forgotten. But the Lord's steadfast love is for all eternity towards those who fear them, and his beneficence for his children's children of those who keep his covenant. So the point of all of this is the world may forget us. We may be rendered dust and ashes. And within a generation or two, or maybe three at most, we are forgotten from the earth. Those of us who manage to publish something that occasionally gets pulled down from the library shelf, we might get a little bit more memory. But all in all, it's incredibly transitory. However, God has a steadfast love that endures forever, and he shows his beneficence to the children's children. So God never forgets about us. And as important or more important, God continues his covenant with those who come after us. So this is a testimony to the idea that Jews are part of an eternal covenant and that we should take comfort in that. So that's the first thing I wanted to call your attention to, but probably the more important one, I can't say it's just, it's more interesting to me, is the opening line, which is B'rachi nafshi et Adonai v'chol kiravai et shem kedosho. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and with all of my being, sanctify his holy name. Now, that's not a truly accurate translation. Uh, all my being is what the JPS uses, but what it actually says in all my kishkis, everything within me will sanctify his name. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? Why do kishkis, why do everything inside of me matter? Because it is the basis for what we know in Jewish practice as davening, or in Yiddish shuckling. Why is it that Jews can't stand still when they're praying? And the answer is, if they're knowledgeable, they know that of this line, and they know that the function of prayer is to bring the total being into engagement with God. And the best way to do that is to move around a little bit. So then everything, your muscles, your internal organs, your entire corporal being is engaged in prayer. Uh, it's kind of a literal reading, but I think it's a powerful one and a useful one, and it certainly explains the Jewish habit of not standing still. It's not just ADD or OCD. We're actually trying to enact this idea that appears in Psalm 103. Now, it can get out of control. And for those of us who are familiar with the East European, Hasidic, yeshiva style of worship, where people are just twitching and jerking all the time, it becomes a bit much. Certainly for the outside observer, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. And actually, for a number of rabbis, it didn't make a great deal of sense. One rabbi asked the question, how many people would go before a king of flesh and blood and just stand there twitching and genuflecting and not standing still? We wouldn't do that. It's not respectful. And so, in the original iteration of the reform movement, we basically did away with almost all physical movement. And in the name of decorum, we stood still like I don't know, like a Lutheran congregation. But that's not quite right either. And so, as time has gone on, the custom has been within the Jewish practice, especially in the Reform movement, is that we strike a compromise. We fulfill this commandment, or this claim that we worship with every part of our body, but we do it in a, shall I call it, a restrained way. So, at the very minimum, we do have certain choreography that we do during the service, bowing at certain points. Famously, we with the Kedusha, we may turn one way and another as if we are addressing our fellow angels, our fellow choir members, and then we'll lift ourselves up on our heels as if we are trying to ascend to heaven. So, at the very least, in Reform worship, for I don't know, the last 60, 70 years, we have incorporated some movement. Now, I'm guilty of a little bit more movement than even that, and I know you know that. Sometimes I actually bounce along to the tune of a prayer, to the rhythm of a prayer. Not exactly the crazed shuckling that you may see in a shtibel in a Hasidic community, but an attempt to honor Psalm 103 while also showing a minimum amount of decorum. So I don't want to say split the baby, probably Solomon's metaphor is used too often, but we try and strike a balance between decorum and engagement. And that really is the point of Psalm 103. And I hope that you feel comfortable in your prayer practice, including at least some movement, so that we can say We sanctify God with our entire being. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to suspend our discussion till next time. We're going to be talking about Psalm 104, which is a fascinating psalm. And I look forward to talking with you next time.